Welcome to the PGP for Crypto podcast. I'm Paul Brigner, head of Coinbase Institute. I'm joined today by a group of journalists from Project Glitch. They're going to talk all about their new crypto-focused journalistic work, as well as talk about an event that we are partnering on for October 24th. It is the DC Privacy Summit. We've got a great show in store for you with a lot to talk about. So Project Glitch, let's just start there. I have Mike Orcutt here in studio with me. We have Lucy online and Michael online. We'll have everyone introduce themselves. Mike, why don't you go first?
Thanks so much for having us, Paul. My name is Mike Orcutt. I'm a founding editor. All three of us are founding editors of Project Glitch. I've been writing about cryptocurrency for almost 10 years, I think. Somehow I'm still here, keep exploring the rabbit hole. I've been in the traditional media at MIT Technology Review and also the crypto media at The Block. And I think Glitch is somewhere in between that. And I worked with Lucy at The Block, and I worked with Michael Reilly at MIT Technology Review. And I've convinced them to set out on a new path in media, which is not a very certain path, as I think everyone knows, but we're just taking one step at a time.
I've noticed your work. As soon as you got started, I think it hit my radar, and I've been super impressed by the depth and balance of your coverage. I think you take a very interesting approach at things, so maybe we can talk about that in a minute. But first, let's let the others introduce themselves, please. So, Michael, why don't you go?
Sure. I'm Mike Reilly. Also founding editor, as Mike has said, and I've been a science and tech journalist since I knew what those two words meant together. I didn't realize that you could be a science writer until pretty late in life, and then that's what I did for my career. So I've been a New Scientist, where I led technology coverage there. As executive editor at MIT Technology Review, most recently a managing editor at the Markup, investigative news outlet. I love science. I love technology. I'm fascinated by the world of crypto and blockchain. I think, there's the seeds of real transformative technology here. And I think that the mainstream media, by and large, is completely missing the real story. And so when Mike approached me with this opportunity to go and tell a story that is being ignored, or at least vastly undercovered in the mainstream media, I thought there was a huge opportunity here, and that's what Project Glitch is all about. So excited to be here.
Awesome. And you and Mike worked together at MIT Tech Review. That's where you met, is that right?
Yeah, Mike and I go way back. We knew each other. Mike was there when I arrived at Tech Review in 2016. And he was doing his kind of general assignment, doing a bunch of different things. And, he was also covering crypto at that time, but had sort of all and sundry sort of kitchen sink kind of role. And, the market and the industry started to really move. And he was like, hey, I think there's something here. I should do this full time. And we agreed. And he became Tech Review's first blockchain reporter. And so he was doing that full time. And, we dug in deep, to use his phrase. We went down the rabbit hole together, and learned a whole heck of a lot about during the ICO boom, I would say, about how the industry was working, where the real news was versus the hype, and how to separate those two things. And so we really spent a long time honing our methodology and our approach to that.
Awesome. You guys have been at it a long time. That's impressive. OG crypto journalists. Lucy, how did you fit into this picture and get connected with these guys?
Yeah, so I'm not as OG as these guys. I started covering crypto in 2021. Previously to that, I had been freelancing and had a staff job at WSJ for a while. So previously I'd been sort of doing like markets reporting. And then when I was freelancing, I did a few more like tech and science stories and started to find crypto really interesting. And I already knew some people who were working at the Block. Decided to take the leap and go full time. And I could also see that like there was something happening which I didn't quite understand, and I really wanted to kind of go a bit deeper into it with crypto. Like, you know, it was in the middle of the bull run, like prices were going crazy. There was something happening with the technology that I couldn't like quite put my finger on what was interesting about it. But yeah, so I met Mike Orcutt at the Block, and then I guess the rest is history. Like when I left the Block, Mike sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, let's make something new. Let's do some cool features. And here we are today.
I love it. That's great. Just an amazing story. So you both met at the Block. Okay, so then we have the MIT Tech Review connection, we have the Block connection, and there's somebody else too, right? In the mix, you have another.
Right, there's another former colleague from the Block, Sam Venus, and he's interested in network states and things like that.
Great. So as you decided to like branch out on your own and do this new effort, the Project Glitch, what did you see that was missing in the crypto journalism ecosystem? There must have been something that you thought, or like a place that you thought you could fill that nobody else was.
I think that's right. I think it goes back to when we were at Tech Review, and at MIT, I think MIT Technology Review sits in a fairly privileged position in the sense that the institution behind it, at least when I was there, wasn't putting pressure on it to be super profitable. The priority was on journalism, good journalism. And in the crypto space, that actually, I saw that putting us at an advantage because it gave me time to sit and think about what was happening and figure out who might be insightful and wait for them to respond to my emails and set up a call with them, and then have conversations with my editor where they listen to me ramble and then tell me I have no idea what you just said. All of that takes a lot of time, and we took the time and we figured out kind of an approach we wanted to take, which is again kind of the rabbit hole analogy, is just as events occurred, figure out sort of who the central players were and what the technology questions were, and then report on those, try to explain how those things connected and why they mattered outside of the crypto sphere. And so we launched a newsletter called Chain Letter, and we had to send that once a week. At first it was twice a week, but then we were sending it once a week, and so we were constantly having to apply this method that we were developing. And that's where it started. When I was at the Block, I was more kind of behind the scenes working as an editor, but it reinforced this idea that I had at Tech Review, which was that there's this demand out there for plainly spoken explanations and descriptions of what is going on with these crypto people and what they're building and why they're building it and why that matters outside of the sort of crypto echo chamber, that isn't really there for a number of reasons. It has to do, I think, with the way that the media outlets that cover crypto decide to serve their various audiences. I don't think it's anyone's fault, but I think that there's this opportunity that's been left on the table for explanatory journalism.
Yeah, I don't know. I might be a little bit more pointed in my criticism of the media coverage to this point. Only to say that I think that, without trying to, I think there are a lot of good journalists out there working in this space. I think that the mainstream media, the biggest outlets, the sort of paper of record and so on, find themselves enamored with the scandals and the biggest sort of moments where hype gets punctured, or like the Sam Bankman-Fried sort of sagas unfold. And this is a symptom of mainstream media that we see, in all venues, not just in crypto, but I think in crypto, a lot of people want, or in mainstream media, there almost seems to be a desire for this to be the story, right, or the narrative. And as Mike said, like at Tech Review, we had a luxury of focusing on the technologies that people were building, again, in a range of venues. As executive editor, I was overseeing energy, biotech, artificial intelligence, and a whole bunch of different sort of specific domains. And the methodology is essentially the same. Let's focus on the technologies and their impacts. Who's building? What are they building? What's going to work and what's not working? And let's separate the hype from what's real. And Mike, is extremely skilled at that. He and I work very closely on doing that in the crypto and blockchain space. And when he said, like, hey, let's do this because it needs to be done for crypto. Like, now it's not being done enough. There's a big opportunity here. You can read the coverage and you can see that is true. So I think that's what gives Glitch, as Mike said, an advantage. Like we take that ethos, and Lucy embodies that ethos as well. We are of one mind. Very much, and to take it out there and say, let's practice that every day, and find all those interesting corners of crypto that are emerging. We're not about, there's no boosterism here, right? This is journalism. So if something is elevated, it's because there's merit to it. We go about our business with rigor. We're very enthusiastic people. But we're enthusiastic for things that stand up to scrutiny, and we think anybody who is building something worth being in the world will be enthusiastic about that, because they will know that something that works should be elevated, and they'll be eager for people like us to come along and talk to them and get to know them.
Lucy, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think just having come from like legacy publications, which do what Mike and Michael just described as sort of like try and relentlessly pick holes and stuff, and then having gone to the block, observed crypto media, which has a more like vested interest in the industry doing well, I guess, like saying it quite plainly. I do feel like there's this kind of like third space. There's a way where we can be interested in stuff and take it seriously, and take it on its merits as technology rather than a way to line your pockets. So I think that's kind of what guides our coverage.
Yeah, so I sense a distinct skepticism, but also like searching for the truth and getting beyond the hype, which I really appreciate that, because I think that is what the industry needs. Stepping away a little bit from the pure financialization issues and opportunities. I think there are opportunities there, of course, but there's also others. And I'm really curious to hear some of your perspectives about what you think is really interesting about the technology. Like, what parts of the technology do you think are very meaningful that we might be taking for granted as part of a future internet, perhaps?
Mm-hmm. I can start. When we were at Tech Review, we had these kind of traditional print editors who were skeptical of any new claims that were being made in the technological landscape. A lot of our news meetings were pitches that the majority of which were not accepted, even though they may have been good ideas, because we wanted to only speak about things that we were very confident mattered. And so when Bitcoin emerged, we had someone who his beat was computing, and he did it in an explainer, and he wrote about some of these early cryptographic research projects. And I helped him with a couple of those things. And when I started to write about crypto, people started to reach out to me on the topic, communications people, PR people. One of them was Niraj from Coin Center, and I remember actually this lunch that I had with him and Peter Van Valkenburg, where they were telling me that this wasn't just about money. This was about there was something here that could form at least part of the basis of some kind of future internet. And I was very confused by what they were talking about. But I decided, I went back to Reilly, and I think we talked about that, and I decided to try to figure out who else was talking in those terms, who else was having those ideas. And I started talking to some investors, but also people working on things at the kind of research level at MIT. And so I started to realize this is an idea that has legs, even if it's kind of hard to imagine exactly how this fits in. And we got a little bit caught up on the blockchain scaling issues that were a big deal and continue to be a big deal, but were a much bigger deal in the sort of the 2017 era, and almost started to wonder if this was really all hype. It kind of didn't seem like maybe these things were going to operate at the scale that these grand ideas seemed to imply they would. That's sort of taken care of itself over the years to some degree, which we could talk about. But we also got caught up, something that got our attention was privacy, and in particular zero-knowledge cryptography, which was starting to become a more talked about issue in the context of Zcash. So we learned about Zcash, and we actually put zero knowledge proofs on our list of 10 breakthrough technologies in I think it was early 2019, or maybe
it might have been for 2019. Yeah, I was just trying to remember. I think because we did it the year before, so we were making that decision in 2018, but it comes out in 2019. Yeah.
Right, and we had a sense then, based on the way that we kind of understood how technology, just from observing in other realms, we had a sense then that this was a technology that is going to make a difference. That it was primitive, but that it was going to make a difference. And so we did our best to kind of make that concrete. And in the couple years that I was at the block, the research around zero knowledge just exploded, and we never had a lot of the time really and space to dive too deep into that at the block. But as soon as I went out on my own, I wrote about a video game, a crypto video game called Dark Forest that used zero knowledge to hide information without relying on a centralized server. And I met a bunch of people that were working in and around that game and on things that had been inspired by that game that made me realize that some of these promises that people made back, or these big ideas that people had and explained to me back 2017 era, were a lot closer to maybe coming to fruition, at least on a sort of primitive level. There's some real prototypes of some of these ideas that maybe to some degree I personally had kind of almost given up on, and so I decided to kind of refocus on the future. How does this stuff fit into the future of the internet? And that's hopefully what Glitch conveys is this exploration of that question.
Yeah, well, that's great. It kind of links to my personal story as well. For listeners of the podcast who've seen me in the past, they know that I formerly worked for Electric Coin Company. That's the creators and developers of Zcash. They were the pioneers of zero knowledge proofs. So I joined that project because I felt similar. I think I had similar feelings about the technology and how impactful it could be and how amazing it was, and the potential for that technology and others that are developing inside the blockchain world to be part of a future internet, which is really what excites me about it, because I think that there's a potential to have an internet that doesn't rely on these centralized parties so much, and maybe has something that is not having the effects that big tech has had, that would just be completely different, that we would have more control and custody and self-sufficiency with our online persona, which is pretty exciting.
Right.
So that is a great segue really into, I think the time when I first met you, Mike, was at one of the PGP for Crypto breakfast meetings that I've been hosting. And you had approached me about Glitch, telling me about Glitch, that you had just started it and were interested in having events and having meetings. And I think maybe someone told you that this is kind of a passion of mine to convene people to talk about these topics. And So I immediately thought it was a great idea to do something with you and Glitch, just because I liked what I saw. I liked what I was reading, and just your approach that you've just described. And I think that was like 4 months ago or so, maybe longer. I don't know. It was a bit ago.
April or May, I think.
Yeah. So it started there, and I since joined Coinbase, and I'm in a better position to like host impactful meetings. And as soon as I came onto Coinbase, we talked again, and we decided to do an event together. So that's one of the things that we're here to talk about, and that by the time this podcast is released, the event will be released as well. So you might see information about it. It's the DC Privacy Summit that is going to be held on October 24th. An all-day event. I think we're looking at like 9:30 to 4:30 in the afternoon. 9:30 in the morning to 4:30. And it's going to be just fantastic, in my opinion, because what the arrangement we have is where I'm coming in as Coinbase Institute as kind of a lead sponsor, and I'm helping to organize the event. But Project Glitch is really managing the program and helping to identify speakers that are going to make this a very special event. And they've done just an amazing job, and we do have an incredible lineup. So, Mike, do you want to just talk about how you approached programming for this event and what you were trying to shoot for, and what people will experience when they come to this event on the 24th of October?
Sure. Yeah, I think with Glitch generally, one of the things that we want to try to do is when we do reporting and meet a bunch of interesting people and learn about a bunch of interesting things, we don't want that to be just sort of one and done, write about it and then kind of have that disappear into the memory hole. And anybody can find our content anytime they want. But in-person events struck us as an opportunity to turn some of that reporting that we're doing on the page into a different format that may resonate differently, may resonate with more people, but also gives us an opportunity to develop a business plan around our journalism, which is something that is extremely challenging in this particular industry. And I think the topic that we've chosen to focus on it's related to what I was talking about before, which is we have glommed on to the Tornado Cash case. In the same vein of this interest in privacy technology and zero knowledge, and how that matters in the rest of the world. This is an example of a system that is a truly decentralized system that can't be killed and has had a kind of a violent collision with the traditional regulatory mindset, and that has led me to learn about how people are kind of imagining the way that zero knowledge cryptography could be used to actually help get around this problem, which is interesting in itself. There's a whole zero knowledge cryptography has this whole other facet that hasn't been unlocked yet, and what we realized is that we had kind of established enough of a storyline and enough of a network just through our journalism that we had an opportunity to bring it to life. And it's not just a dorm room conversation. These they're people who are there are people in jail, people facing prison time. There's constitutional questions about the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment. And this is Washington, D.C., so there's no better place to have this conversation. And maybe if it's an in-person conversation as opposed to simply writing some of these things down, it could have a different kind of an impact.
Yeah, I mean, if I could build on that, like I think Mike's use of the word conversation, that's a word that we use a lot internally. Obviously journalism is about going out and reporting stories and, finding, sort of uncovering truths and doing all of the sort of gumshoeing stuff that people imagine journalists do. I think more and more it needs to be thought of as a conversation. and an event is just an amazing way to, as Mike said, bring that to life, bring people into the room, people with diverse viewpoints, diverse opinions, some of which will be, they're not all going to come and agree with each other, and that's a good thing. We want people in the room who are opinionated, who have been out there in trenches as technologists, as policymakers, as thought leaders, coming together and disagreeing with one another, and doing the hard work of figuring out how to move forward in a constructive way. We want to help create a venue for that. I mean, that's what you do, Paul, with PGP, is to convene, right? And as Mike said, like, through the course of reporting, we've identified people, we've identified these different perspectives and these different experiences that people are having with the technologies that they're building. And oftentimes they will have an idea about how the world should move forward, or how their part of the world should move forward. And you talk to enough of them and you realize that sometimes they're not all talking to each other. And so the DC Privacy Summit is an opportunity to bring those people together.
Lucy, any perspectives on the event?
I think it's just a good opportunity to, meet people where they are, and bring lots of the people that we've been speaking to, who often even refer to each other into the same room to kind of I don't know, because I speak to a bunch of different people who have different perspectives on Tornado Cash from what even we've been writing. So it's kind of going to be interesting for us to meet people who believe different things from us even. So I'm excited.
Well, the event is really coming together incredibly well. Where I think we are able to do
let's talk about some speakers. We're excited.
Exactly.
I'm super excited.
Let's talk about the speakers. And I was just going to say that between us, and based on your prior work in the space and in my work in the space as well, I think we have access to a true all-star lineup. I mean, really, of privacy luminaries. Like, it's not just something that you're going to pull together overnight. Even though we pulled this together pretty darn quick, we have just a fantastic lineup. Who would like to give us a rundown?
They're so great. I mean, I'll just say that Mike is the one. He's been the prime mover in terms of talking to these people and getting them on board. But I just want to say that my experience of doing events is usually that a lot of people say no before some say yes. And in this case, it's been like every person. We were like, let's shoot for the moon. Who do we want? Peter Van Valkenburg, Zuko Wilcox, Rebecca Rettig, and we're going, and they're going, and I got a text from Mike going, yeah, Rettig's in, and I'm like, wow, it's just kept happening. It's so exciting to have this lineup. But I think, Mike, you as the person who has been out there, really making those connections and working to curate this program, I think the most of all of us, you should speak to it.
Yeah, so I have been approaching this in terms of trying to kind of like what I was saying before, similar to how I would approach a story that we would report out, that we would write. So being conscious of the sequence of which ideas we want to talk about, and also the way that the sequence in which they're presented and things like that. And so, Peter Van Valkenburg of Coin Center has spoken in many different venues on Tornado Cash and the stakes for privacy with those particular cases. There's a number of lawsuits that are ongoing, and also some criminal cases that are extremely relevant to the future of privacy generally. And so hopefully, Peter will speak to kick off the day, and we will have we will talk to Rebecca Rettig and Michael Mosier, who have written a very influential policy paper about the idea that if it's a genuine DeFi system, their old approaches to management of the risk of illicit finance simply won't work in some cases, because it's dependent on there being a centralized intermediary. And Tornado Cash is a really good example of this. I mean, when the term DeFi comes up, maybe not everyone thinks about Tornado Cash, but it's actually a perfect example of a decentralized financial system. And it's one that probably, if you want to manage the risk there of illicit finance, need to come up with a different way, because the traditional approach of levying sanctions and prosecuting developers, I guess, if you can call that traditional, hasn't stopped the tool from being used. So yeah, we don't want to talk about Tornado Cash all day. It's just that you can't have a serious conversation without broaching that subject right off the bat. It's sort of the elephant in the room. But there are plenty of folks out there who talk about privacy in a different way and are building systems that maybe they're kind of like Tornado Cash in the sense that they use zero knowledge and they put user privacy at the highest priority. But they're after different end goals, and we want those people to talk about that. So one example of that is Aztec, and another example is Alio. Hopefully, we'll have some representatives from those projects, which are really interesting there.
No, we've got a lot that we're still working on with the program, but what we do have set up is just amazing, and we are going to have some senior level policymakers, we believe. Those are not yet confirmed either, but it takes a bit for them to get clearance to be able to say they can speak. So hopefully we'll have that to announce very soon. And, I would say that we're really focused on this event not coming across as overly technical, although it is a very technical topic. We're talking about technology here that is really hard to get your head around. In fact, people refer to it as moon math because it is so hard to get your head around. But the goal and the reason why I'm so happy to work with Project Glitch on this is because it is their special talent to be able to take content like this and make it digestible, make it understandable, take a little bit of the tech jargon out of it and make it something that is actually usable by policymakers, which is really our goal here, because we're in DC. We want there to be solutions for these really difficult problems that policymakers are dealing with. So hopefully this event will make a contribution, and we hope this will be an annual event going forward. In fact, that's why we're referring to it as the inaugural DC Privacy Summit, because this is going to be something that is going to be developing and evolving over years. So this is something we could do next year and probably a number of years into the future. But beyond that, it is my hope to do even more with Glitch. I think that I see the talent in them to be able to take these topics and make them understandable. So there's others that we're beginning to talk about. We don't have other events planned just yet, but it is my intention to convince them to take another one on if they have more energy after this one. I know they put a lot into this already, but there's some interesting topics. You want to mention a couple that might be good content for an event in the future?
Something I've been thinking about is just the sort of a continuation of the discussion that we'll have at the Privacy Summit, but more focused on some of the other aspects of zero knowledge, and how that could lead to more efficient decentralized computing, private computing, and what that might mean for the future of the internet, but with less of an emphasis on privacy and more on an emphasis on new sorts of interactions, including interactions that might be mediated by AI, which is going to intersect with this technology in ways that will be unexpected, but also in ways that will make sense and in ways that are probably not at all what the ways that people are saying right now that it will happen exactly. So we want to watch that really closely, and we can kind of see a touch point there.
Did you want to jump in there, Lucy?
Yeah, and I'm kind of I was just going to say I'm excited to kind of explore more of the consumer applications of ZK tech, because I think that we've been trying to cover it a bit at Glitch. We're seeing really interesting small startups develop quite cool little games and things related to identity, things related to national identity, passports, So that's kind of an avenue I see us potentially going down, more kind of like consumer real world things that like, you can look at and you can touch. And yeah, like your mum will understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And to echo just or to respond to something you said earlier, Paul, about how Glitch, like we try to do things without jargon or to break it down. I mean, I would say unequivocally we are the enemies of jargon. I mean, that is something we really, really strive to break down and make accessible to everyone, even as we engage, the deepest thinkers and builders in the space. And there are so many ways that this could go. I mean, I think you're absolutely right to suggest that this is the inaugural DC Privacy Summit because, privacy is fundamental to. I think that's what kind of people got into in sort of like internet. I guess we call it Web 2. Still feels kind of like Web 1 to me, but I guess Web 2 because now that all tech companies are doing what they do. This version of the internet that we're all living in, I think a lot of people accept it for what it is, and that like as though like a building has been built and it can't be rebuilt. But that's what these technologies that we cover are doing, right? I mean, they're laying the groundwork for a new internet, a whole new way of interacting online, a whole new way of obviously like transacting financially, of playing, of living, and that's so exciting. So privacy is fundamental to those things. But then you build from there, and to borrow from, the famous TED conferences, they put entertainment and design in there after technology for a reason. And, those things will be emergent from these fundamental technological advances that we're seeing now.
Well, that I think is a perfect note to wrap up on. I think we've had a really good discussion about this. Hopefully we've piqued everyone's interest out there who's watching or listening. And I guess we should end on saying that if you want to connect with Project Glitch, the right way to do that is to subscribe to their newsletter, projectglitch.xyz, correct?
That's right.
Okay. And to register for the DC Privacy Summit, go to dcprivacysummit.org, and there you can see all the details about the event and find the registration link as well. We really hope to see you. It's going to be very special, and hopefully we will all walk away with a new understanding of this really fascinating and impactful technology. Thanks for joining.
Paul. It's been a fun conversation.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks a lot, guys. Take care.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having us.